8,000 years is a long time to sleep. It is long enough for empires to rise and fall. It is long enough for stars to be born and die. It is long enough for an entire species to fade from memory and become nothing more than a whispered legend told to frighten children. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one from the old times could have imagined. Where there had once been chaos and war, there was now peace. Where there had once been countless species fighting for survival, there was now the Galactic Confederacy, a union of civilizations that stretched across 3 spiral arms of the Milky Way. The Volari were among the most prominent members of this great union. They were tall and slender creatures with scales that shimmered like opals in the light. Their eyes were large and amber-colored, adapted for the dim light of their homeworld. They were traders and explorers by nature, always seeking new discoveries in the forgotten corners of the universe. The Keth were scholars and scientists. They resembled large insects with multiple limbs and compound eyes that could see in spectrums no other species could perceive. They kept the records of galactic history and spent their lives studying the mysteries of the cosmos. The Sundari were isolationists who preferred to stay within their own borders. They were massive creatures, slow and deliberate in everything they did. They trusted no one outside their own kind and viewed the rest of the galaxy with suspicion. There were dozens of other species as well, each with their own worlds and cultures and histories. They lived together in relative harmony, trading goods and ideas across the vast distances between stars. Conflict still existed, of course. There were disputes over resources and territory. There were misunderstandings and occasional violence. But true war, the kind that had once threatened to tear the galaxy apart, had become a thing of the past. This was because the species that had been best at war were gone. Humans, they had been called. The old records described them in terms that seemed almost mythical. They had evolved on a world that the Keth historians classified as a Category 12 death world. This classification meant that the planet had possessed almost every environmental hazard imaginable: extreme temperature variations, dangerous levels of solar radiation, crushing gravity, toxic plant life, predators that could kill in dozens of different ways. And yet humans had not merely survived on this hostile world. They had thrived. They had spread across its surface and eventually reached out to the stars themselves. The records spoke of their physical capabilities with something approaching awe. Humans could run for hours without stopping. They could survive injuries that would kill most other species. They could eat foods that were poisonous to nearly every other form of life in the galaxy. They healed from wounds at a rate that seemed almost supernatural, but it was their minds that had truly made them dangerous. Humans were creative in ways that other species could not comprehend. They could look at a problem and find solutions that no one else would ever consider. They were adaptable. They were persistent. They simply refused to give up, even when every logical analysis suggested that they should. The old wars had proven this beyond any doubt. When the young species of the galaxy had fought each other for dominance, it had been the humans who emerged victorious time and time again, not because they were the strongest or the most numerous or the most technologically advanced, but because they simply would not stop. They would take losses that would break any other species. They would suffer defeats that would crush any other civilization, and they would keep coming back, again and again, until their enemies were exhausted. Then, 8,000 years ago, they had simply vanished. A plague had swept through their colonies with terrifying speed. The Keth historians still did not fully understand what had happened. Some believed it was a natural disease that had mutated in the conditions of space travel. Others thought it might have been a biological weapon created by one of the species that humans had defeated in the old wars. Whatever its origin, the plague had been devastatingly effective. Within a single generation, humanity had gone from a dominant power to a fading memory. The last human worlds had gone silent. The last human ships had stopped transmitting. The galaxy had held its breath, waiting for the survivors to emerge and rebuild, as they always had before. But no survivors came. Centuries passed. Then, millennia. The other species gradually accepted that humanity was truly gone. They dismantled the human colonies and recycled the materials. They studied the human records and tried to understand the species that had once ruled the stars. And slowly, inevitably, they began to forget. The stories of human strength became exaggerated legends. The tales of human endurance became fairy stories. The younger generations grew up believing that humans had been nothing more than a myth, a convenient boogeyman invented by their elders to explain the scars of ancient wars. This was the galaxy that Captain Zell knew. She was a Valari salvage operator who made her living exploring the forgotten places where valuable technology might still be found. Her ship, the Wandering Star, was small but well-equipped for the dangerous work of deep space salvage. Her crew consisted of 12 Valari and a single Keth historian named Scholar Bren. Bren had hired onto her ship because he believed that the outer reaches still held secrets from the old times. Most of his colleagues thought he was wasting his time. The outer reaches had been picked clean centuries ago. But Bren was stubborn, and his money was good. So Captain Zell had agreed to take him along. It was Bren who first detected the anomaly. They were orbiting a dead moon around a failed gas giant when his sensors picked up a faint energy signature beneath the ice. The signal was weak, barely detectable even with the most sensitive equipment. But it was undeniably artificial. Captain Zell ordered the excavation. Her crew worked for 3 days, cutting through kilometers of ancient ice with plasma torches and gravity manipulators. What they found at the bottom made them stop and stare in disbelief. It was a ship. The design was unlike anything in the modern database. It was angular and functional, built for efficiency rather than aesthetics. The hull was scarred with impact marks and burn damage, evidence of some ancient catastrophe. But the markings on the side were still visible. Bren translated them with trembling limbs. The symbols spelled out words in a language that had not been spoken for 8,000 years. USS Endurance, Colony Vessel, Earth Registry. It was a human ship. Captain Zell led the boarding party herself. They cut through the outer airlock and made their way through corridors that had been designed for creatures their size but somehow felt wrong. Everything was too solid, too heavy, too built for violence. They found the cryo chambers deep in the heart of the ship. There were hundreds of them, arranged in neat rows that stretched into the darkness. Most of them were dark. Their power had failed long ago, and whatever had been inside them had long since turned to dust. But one chamber still glowed with a soft blue light. Captain Zell approached it slowly. Through the frost-covered glass, she could see a face. It was flat and strange, with small eyes and pale skin. The creature inside was smaller than she had expected, barely taller than an average Valari. It did not look like the terrifying monster from the old legends. The display panel showed stable vital signs. After 8,000 years, this creature was still alive. Bren checked the identity files that were still stored in the chamber's memory. The name came up in the old human script: Jake Cole. Sergeant, United States Marine Corps. Captain Zell looked at the sleeping human for a long time. She knew that she should contact the authorities. She knew that she should wait for experts to arrive. She knew that waking this creature could be the most dangerous thing she had ever done. But Valari were explorers by nature. They were driven by curiosity, by the need to discover and understand. And Captain Zell had never been good at following the safe path. She reached out and pressed the revival sequence. The chamber began to hum. The ice on the glass started to melt. And deep within, after 8,000 years of dreamless sleep, Jake Cole began to wake up. The galaxy was about to remember what humans were like. The first thing Jake Cole felt was cold. It was a deep cold that seemed to reach into his bones and squeeze. His lungs burned as they drew in air for what felt like the first time in forever. His heart pounded in his chest, struggling to pump blood that had been still for far too long. Then came the light. It was harsh and bright, stabbing into his eyes like needles. He tried to raise his hand to shield his face, but his muscles refused to obey. They were stiff and weak, like rubber bands that had been stretched too far. Voices reached his ears. They were strange sounds, clicks and whistles and tones that his brain could not process. He forced his eyes open and saw shapes moving above him. They were tall and thin, with scales that caught the light and reflected it in rainbow patterns. Their eyes were huge and golden, staring down at him with an expression he could not read. His training kicked in before his conscious mind could catch up. Jake rolled off the surface he was lying on and dropped into a crouch on the floor. His legs screamed in protest, but he forced them to hold his weight. His hands came up in a defensive position, ready to strike at anything that came too close. The creatures around him reacted with terror. They screamed in their strange language and scrambled backward, knocking over equipment and crashing into each other in their desperate attempt to get away from him. One of them collapsed to the ground and did not move. Jake scanned the room with eyes that were slowly adjusting to the light. He counted 12 hostiles. No visible weapons. The environment appeared to be a medical bay of some kind, but the technology was completely unfamiliar. Nothing matched any design he had ever seen. A new figure entered the room. This one moved more slowly than the others. She was taller than the rest, with darker scales and a pattern of silver markings across her face. She held up her hands in what Jake recognized as a universal gesture of peace. She spoke, but the sounds meant nothing to him. Jake stayed in his crouch, watching her carefully. She reached slowly to her belt and removed a small device. She held it up so he could see it, then pressed a button on its surface. A beam of light shot out and touched his ear. There was a brief moment of discomfort, like a needle sliding into his skin. Then the sounds around him began to change. The clicks and whistles started to form patterns. The patterns became words. "Please," the tall creature was saying. "We mean you no harm. We are friends. We found you in the ice. We saved you." Jake did not relax his stance. "Where am I? What year is it? Where is my unit?" The creature exchanged a look with the others in the room. Even without understanding their expressions, Jake could tell that something was wrong. "My name is Captain Zell," she said. "You are aboard my ship, the Wandering Star. We found your vessel buried beneath the surface of an ice moon, in the outer reaches." She paused. "I do not know how to tell you this gently. The year, by your old Earth calendar, is 10,847. Jake stared at her. His mind refused to process the number. "That is not possible." "I am sorry," Captain Zell said. "You have been asleep for approximately 8,000 years. The strength went out of Jake's legs. He sat down heavily on the floor, his back against the wall. 8,000 years. Everyone he had ever known was dead. His family, his friends, his brothers in the Corps, all of them were gone. Turned to dust millennia ago. "My species," he said. "Humans. Where are they? Take me to them." Captain Zell's large eyes filled with an emotion that Jake would later learn was sorrow. "There are no more humans," she said. "A plague swept through your colonies 8,000 years ago. There were no survivors. You are the last of your kind." Jake sat in silence for a very long time. The days that followed were difficult. Jake learned to communicate with the crew of the Wandering Star through the translation device that Captain Zell had given him. He learned about the Galactic Confederacy and the species that comprised it. He learned about the 8,000 years of history that had passed while he slept. But most of all, he learned that the galaxy had forgotten what humans were like. The crew treated him with a mixture of fear and fascination. They watched him constantly, studying his every movement as if he were some exotic animal. They whispered among themselves when they thought he could not hear, using words like "death world" and "persistence predator," as if they were describing a monster from their nightmares. Scholar Bren, the Keth historian, was the most eager to study him. The insectoid creature followed Jake everywhere, asking endless questions about human history and culture. Jake answered as best he could, though the memories were painful. It was Bren who first suggested that Jake try the ship's exercise facilities. The Valari, it seemed, were not a physically active species. Their gymnasium was designed for gentle stretching and light movement, the kind of exercise that would barely raise a human's heart rate. Jake completed their most advanced endurance course in 12 minutes. It was designed to take 4 hours. The crew watched the recording of his performance in stunned silence. Captain Zell asked him to repeat it, convinced that there must have been some error. Jake completed it in 11 minutes the second time. "This is impossible," one of the Valari engineers said. "No creature can move that fast for that long." His cardiovascular system should have failed within the first 10 minutes. Humans evolved as persistence hunters, Bren explained, his compound eyes gleaming with scholarly excitement. They did not chase their prey with speed. They followed it for hours, sometimes days, until it collapsed from exhaustion. Their bodies are designed for endurance that no other species can match. Jake just shrugged. To him, it had been a light warm-up. The next demonstration came by accident. A Volari crew member named Tess was working in the cargo bay when a crane malfunctioned. A heavy container broke free from its restraints and began to fall directly toward another worker who had not seen the danger. Jake was on the other side of the bay. He saw the container falling. He calculated the trajectory. And he moved. The other Volari barely had time to register what was happening before Jake was there. He caught the falling container with one hand and held it steady while Tess scrambled to safety. The container weighed 400 kilograms. Jake set it down gently and looked at his hand. His palm was bruised but not broken. He had been stronger once, before the long sleep had weakened him. How? Captain Zell asked, her voice barely a whisper. Humans evolved on a high-gravity world, Jake said. Our muscles and bones are denser than yours. We are stronger than we look. The crew began to treat him differently after that. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with something else. Respect, perhaps, or awe. Scholar Bren approached him that evening with a data pad filled with old records. I have been reviewing the historical accounts of human capabilities, he said. I always assumed they were exaggerated, tales told to frighten children and explain the outcomes of ancient wars. And now? Jake asked. Bren's compound eyes seemed to shine in the dim light of the ship. Now I believe they may have been understatements. The records say that humans could survive injuries that would kill any other species, that they could function without sleep for days, that they could recover from wounds that should have been fatal. He paused. Is this true? Jake thought about the battles he had survived, the injuries he had endured, the times when he should have died but simply refused to do so. It is true, he said. Bren set down his data pad. Then I must ask you something important, Sergeant Cole. If the humans were as powerful as the records suggest, how did a plague destroy your entire species? How did you not find a way to survive, as you always had before? Jake looked out the window at the endless stars. Somewhere out there, the worlds where his people had lived were orbiting in silent darkness. The cities they had built were empty ruins. The dreams they had dreamed were forgotten. I do not know, he said. I was already in cryo sleep when the plague began. By the time I could have been revived, everyone was already gone. He turned back to face Bren. But I intend to find out. Whatever happened to my people, whatever killed them, I will discover the truth. And then what? Bren asked. Jake's expression hardened into something that made even the fearless scholar take a step backward. Then I will make sure it never happens again. In the weeks that followed, word of Jake's awakening began to spread beyond the wandering star. Captain Zell had tried to keep the discovery quiet, but secrets had a way of escaping in a galaxy connected by faster-than-light communication. Soon, the entire Confederacy would know that a human had returned, and the galaxy would remember why they had once feared the creatures from the death world called Earth. The message arrived at the Confederacy High Council 3 weeks after Jake Cole opened his eyes. It was a simple transmission, sent through official channels from Captain Zell's salvage vessel. The content was brief and factual. A human survivor had been discovered in cryosleep on an ice moon in the outer reaches. The human was alive and in good health. Captain Zell was requesting guidance on how to proceed. The reaction was immediate and chaotic. The council chamber on the capital world of Nexus Prime erupted into arguments that lasted for days. Species that had not agreed on anything in centuries suddenly found themselves taking passionate positions on what should be done about this remarkable discovery. The Volari delegation argued for peaceful contact and scientific study. They pointed out that the human had shown no signs of aggression and had cooperated fully with Captain Zell's crew. This was an opportunity for the galaxy to learn about a lost civilization and perhaps understand the mistakes of the past. The Keth scholars agreed enthusiastically. To them, Jake Cole was a living treasure. a primary source of historical information that no amount of archaeological research could ever replace. They demanded that he be brought to their great libraries and given every comfort while they recorded his memories and experiences. The Sundari took a very different position. They reminded the council of the old wars, of the devastation that humans had caused before their disappearance. They argued that even a single human represented a potential threat to galactic peace. The creature should be contained, studied from a safe distance, and perhaps terminated if it showed any signs of becoming dangerous. Other species fell somewhere between these extremes. Some were curious, some were afraid, some simply did not care about events in the distant outer reaches. The debates continued without resolution, filling the council chambers with noise and accomplishing nothing of substance. But not everyone in the galaxy was content to simply talk. The Dominion of the Vex had never joined the Confederacy. They occupied a region of space beyond the established borders, a territory they had carved out through conquest and held through force. The Vex were warriors by nature and culture. They believed that strength was the only true currency in the universe, and that those who could not defend themselves deserved to lose everything they had. For centuries, the Vex had probed the Confederacy's defenses. They had tested the border patrols. They had raided outlying colonies. They had pushed and prodded, searching for weakness, waiting for the right moment to launch a full invasion. The Confederacy had always managed to hold them back, not through military might, for the Confederacy had grown soft and peaceful over the millennia, but through unity. The combined resources of dozens of species were simply too much for even the Vex to overcome through direct assault. So the Vex had waited. They had built their fleets. They had trained their soldiers. They had planned for the day when the Confederacy would finally show the weakness they knew was hiding beneath the surface. And now, a human had awakened. High Admiral Kreth received the intelligence report in his personal chambers aboard the Vex flagship Eternal Dominance. He was an old warrior, scarred by countless battles, respected and feared throughout the Dominion. He had spent his entire life preparing for the war that he knew was coming. The report detailed everything that Vex spies had learned about Jake Cole. His background as a Marine, his physical capabilities, his psychological profile, the way he had reacted when he learned that his species was extinct. Kreth read the report 3 times. Then, he called his senior officers to a council of war. The humans were our greatest obstacle, he told them. In the old days, before the plague, they were the only species that could match us in combat. They were creative, unpredictable, utterly relentless. We lost more warriors to human forces than to all other species combined. His officers shifted uncomfortably. These were not pleasant memories for the Vex. Now the galaxy has grown weak, Kreeth continued. The Confederacy has forgotten how to fight. Their military is a joke. Their warriors are soft and untested. We could conquer them within a decade if we chose to do so. Then why have we waited? One of his officers asked. Because of the stories, Kreth said. The legends of human capability. The fear that somewhere, somehow, the humans might return. That fear has stayed my hand for all these years. He paused. But now we know the truth. There is only one human left, a single survivor from a dead species. If we eliminate him now, before he can remind the galaxy what humans were like, we will remove the last obstacle to our dominance. The officers exchanged looks. You want us to assassinate one man? I want us to destroy a symbol, Kreth corrected. The human is more than just a biological curiosity. He is a reminder of what the galaxy once feared. If he lives, if he shows the other species what humans were capable of, it could inspire them. It could awaken something that we have worked for centuries to suppress. His eyes narrowed. I will not allow that to happen. The orders went out that same day. A full attack squadron was dispatched to the outer reaches with instructions to locate the wandering star and destroy it with all hands aboard. No survivors. No witnesses. The human would die, and the galaxy would forget he had ever existed. Meanwhile, aboard the wandering star, Jake Cole was learning about the galaxy he had awakened to. Captain Zell had become something like a friend to him. She spent hours each day answering his questions about the Confederacy, explaining the politics and cultures of the various species, helping him understand the strange new universe in which he found himself alone. Scholar Bren was equally helpful in a different way. The Keth historian had a bottomless appetite for information about human civilization. He asked Jake about everything from military tactics to cooking recipes, recording every answer in his vast database of historical knowledge. Jake found himself enjoying these conversations despite the grief that never quite left him. The aliens were strange, but they were also kind in their own ways. They had saved his life when they could have left him frozen in the ice. They had treated him with respect even when they were clearly terrified of him. "You are not what I expected," Captain Zell admitted one evening as they shared a meal in her quarters. The food was strange, but Jake's human digestive system could process almost anything organic. Another advantage of evolving on a death world. "What did you expect?" Jake asked. "The old stories paint humans as monsters," she said. "Creatures of pure violence who killed for pleasure and conquered for sport. But you are not like that. You are sad. You are lost. You are just trying to understand what happened to your people." Jake looked at his hands. They were the hands of a killer, trained for combat and hardened by war. But they were also the hands of a man who had once held his daughter on the day she was born, a man who had read bedtime stories to his son, a man who had loved and been loved in return. "We were not monsters," he said quietly. "We were just people. We made mistakes. We hurt each other. But we also built beautiful things. We created art and music and stories that made life worth living." He paused. "I wish you could have seen Earth as it was before I left. The blue oceans, the green forests, the cities that stretched toward the sky." Captain Zell reached out and touched his hand with her scaled fingers. It was a gesture of comfort that transcended species. "Perhaps you can show us," she said. "Perhaps you can help us understand what humanity truly was. Not the legends, but the truth." Jake was about to respond when the ship's alarm began to wail. Bren rushed into the room moments later, his compound eyes wide with fear. "Captain, we have incoming vessels. Multiple contacts, dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of sensor range." "Confederacy ships?" Zell asked, rising from her chair. "No," Bren said, his voice trembling. "The signatures match Vex dreadnoughts. Captain, it is an entire attack squadron." Zell's face went pale beneath her scales. "That is impossible. The Vex have never ventured this far into Confederacy space." "They are coming for me," Jake said. His voice was calm, but his eyes had changed. The sadness was gone, replaced by something harder and colder. "They know what I am. They are afraid of what I represent." He stood up and looked at Captain Zell with an expression she had never seen before. It was the expression of a predator that had just spotted its prey. "Does this ship have any weapons at all?" Zell stared at him. "We have mining lasers. Emergency defense systems. Nothing that could stand against a Vex warship." Jake nodded slowly. "Then we will have to improvise." He walked toward the bridge, and the crew of the Wandering Star followed the last human into battle. The Vex fleet emerged from hyperspace like wolves descending on a wounded deer. High Admiral Kreth stood on the bridge of the Eternal Dominance and surveyed his forces with satisfaction. 12 warships. 4,000 warriors. Enough firepower to glass a continent. All of this arrayed against a single salvage vessel, crewed by merchants and scholars. It was excessive, perhaps, but Kreth had not survived this long by underestimating his enemies. The human would die, and he would die thoroughly. "Target acquired," his sensor officer reported. "The Wandering Star is holding position near the ice moon. No signs of movement or defensive preparations." Kreth allowed himself a thin smile. "They know they cannot run. Open a channel. I want to speak to them before they die." The communication screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of the Valari vessel. Kreth saw the terrified faces of the crew, their scales pale with fear. And standing among them, calm and still, was the human. He was smaller than Kreth had expected. The old records had described humans as towering monsters, but this creature barely reached the shoulder of the Valari around him. His skin was pale, his hair dark, his eyes a strange blue-gray color that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "I am High Admiral Kreth of the Vex Dominion," Kreth announced. "You are harboring property that belongs to us. Surrender the human, and your crew will be allowed to live." The human stepped forward. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but carried clearly across the communication channel. "My name is Jake Cole. I am not property, and you are going to die today." Kreth blinked. He had expected fear. He had expected pleading. He had not expected this calm declaration of violence, from a creature who was outnumbered thousands to one. "You are one human against an entire fleet," Kreth said. "You have no weapons, no reinforcements, no hope of survival. What makes you think you can threaten me?" The human smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. 8,000 years ago, my people fought your people in the War of the Outer Rim. We were outnumbered 10 to 1. We had inferior technology and limited resources. Do you know what happened? Kreth said nothing. He knew the history all too well. "We won," Jake said. "We won. Because we do not fight the way you expect. We do not surrender when the odds are against us. We do not give up when we are wounded. We adapt. We improvise. We find ways to kill our enemies that they never saw coming." He paused. "You should have brought more ships." The communication channel went dead. Kreth stared at the blank screen for a long moment. Then he gave the order to attack. Aboard the Wandering Star, Jake Cole was already in motion. He had spent the past hour studying the ship's systems and the tactical situation. The Volari crew had watched him work. Too frightened to ask questions. Too fascinated to look away. He had asked them about the ice moon below, about the ship's mining equipment, about the emergency systems that every vessel was required to carry. Now he issued orders with the confidence of a man who had commanded soldiers in battle. "Captain Zell, take us into the moon's upper atmosphere. Stay low, use the ice geysers for cover. Their sensors will have trouble tracking us through the thermal interference. We cannot hide forever," Zell said, her hands trembling as she worked the controls. "We do not need forever. We need 4 hours." Jake turned to the engineering team. "I need every mining charge you have. Plasma cutters. Emergency fuel reserves. Anything that can explode." The Volari engineer named Tess stared at him. "What are you going to do?" "I am going to turn this salvage ship into a weapon." The next 4 hours were a nightmare of fear and desperate work. Jake had the crew rig the mining charges with remote detonators and launch them into space hidden among the debris from the ice geysers. He had them modify the plasma cutters into crude but effective weapons. He had them drain the emergency fuel reserves into containers that could be ejected from the cargo bay. All the while, the Vex fleet hunted them through the chaos of the moon's atmosphere. Kreth was growing frustrated. His ships had superior firepower and numbers, but the ice geysers were playing havoc with his sensors. The tiny Volari vessel kept disappearing from his screens, appearing in unexpected locations, slipping away before his weapons could lock on. "This is impossible," his tactical officer said. "No Volari captain could maneuver like this. They do not have the instincts for combat." "The human is guiding them," Kreth realized. "He is using their ship like a weapon we cannot see." He made a decision. "All ships, close to visual range. We will find them with our eyes if our sensors fail us." It was exactly what Jake had been waiting for. As the Vex fleet closed in, Jake launched his improvised torpedoes. The mining charges, hidden among the ice debris, detonated against the hulls of 3 Vex destroyers. The explosions were not powerful enough to destroy the warships, but they were powerful enough to cripple their engines and leave them drifting. The Vex formation broke apart as the remaining ships scattered to avoid the unexpected attack. "Now," Jake said, "take us toward that destroyer, the one with the damaged engine." "You want us to get closer to them?" Zell asked in disbelief. "I want to board them." The Volari crew stared at him as if he had lost his mind. Boarding actions had not been used in galactic warfare for thousands of years. Modern ships were designed to fight at a distance, exchanging fire across the vast emptiness of space. The idea of actually entering an enemy vessel and fighting hand-to-hand was considered primitive and insane. But that was because the galaxy had forgotten what humans were like. Jake led the boarding party himself. He took 3 Valari engineers with him. Not because he needed their help in combat, but because he needed them to operate the captured ship's systems. The Wandering Star maneuvered alongside the crippled destroyer, and Jake cut through the airlock with a plasma torch. The Vex were waiting for him. They were large creatures, heavily muscled and covered in armored plates. They carried energy weapons and vibroblades. They had trained for combat their entire lives. None of that mattered. Jake moved through them like a force of nature. He had no weapons except a metal bar he had taken from the engineering bay. But he did not need weapons. Humans were weapons. He broke the first Vex warrior's arm before the creature could raise its rifle. He used the momentum to spin into a second warrior, driving the metal bar through its throat. A third warrior fired at him. But Jake was no longer where the shot was aimed. He had moved, ducked, rolled, and come up behind his attacker with the captured rifle in his hands. The Valari engineers watched in horror and amazement as Jake cleared the corridor in less than 2 minutes. "How?" Tess whispered. "How can one creature do this?" Jake ejected the spent power cell from his captured rifle and slammed in a fresh one. 8,000 years of peace has made you forget what violence really looks like. My species never had that luxury. We were born fighting. We grew up fighting. We were always fighting something, whether it was predators or disease or each other. He started moving down the corridor. Combat is not something we learned. It is something we are. The battle for the destroyer lasted 11 minutes. When it was over, Jake stood on the bridge of a Vex warship, surrounded by the bodies of its former crew. He had taken wounds during the fighting. A slash across his arm, a burn on his shoulder, bruises covering most of his body. Any one of these injuries would have incapacitated a Valari for weeks. Jake barely noticed them. He accessed the destroyer's communication system and broadcast on all frequencies. "This is Jake Cole. I have captured one of your ships. I am willing to let the rest of you leave if you withdraw now. If you stay, I will take another ship. And another. And another. Until there are no ships left to take." There was a long moment of silence. Then the Vex fleet began to retreat. High Admiral Kreth watched from the bridge of the Eternal Dominance as his remaining ships broke formation and fled. He had lost 3 destroyers. He had lost hundreds of warriors. He had lost a battle that should have been a simple execution. And he had remembered why his ancestors had feared humanity. "Signal the fleet," he said quietly. "We are withdrawing to Dominion space." His officers stared at him in shock. "Admiral, we still outnumber them. We can still win this fight." Kreeth shook his head. "That creature just captured one of our ships with nothing but a metal bar and 3 untrained aliens. If we stay, he will find a way to defeat us. I do not know how. I do not know what impossible tactic he will invent next, but I know that he will not stop until we are all dead." He turned away from the screen. The humans were always like this. They do not understand defeat. They do not accept surrender. They just keep coming until there is nothing left to fight. The Vex fleet vanished into hyperspace, leaving behind the wreckage of their fallen ships. Aboard the captured destroyer, Jake Cole sat down heavily in the commander's chair. The adrenaline was fading now, and the pain of his injuries was starting to make itself known. Blood dripped from the wound on his arm, forming small pools on the deck below. Captain Zell found him there a few minutes later. She had brought medical supplies from the Wandering Star. Though she had no idea how to treat human injuries, she looked at him with an expression that mixed fear and awe, and something that might have been hope. "Is it over?" she asked. Jake looked out at the stars through the bridge windows. The ice moon hung in the darkness below, its surface scarred by the battle that had raged above it. Beyond it, the empty vastness of space stretched toward infinity. "For now," he said. "But they will come back. The Vex do not forget their defeats, and they do not forgive them." This was just the beginning. Zell sat down beside him and began cleaning the wound on his arm. "What will you do?" Jake was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was tired but determined. "I will teach you how to fight. All of you. The Valari, the Keth, every species in the Confederacy that wants to survive." He looked at her with eyes that had seen too much death, and still refused to look away. The galaxy has forgotten what humans were like. It is time to remind them. Zell nodded slowly. She did not fully understand what she had witnessed today. She did not know what the future would hold. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. The human called Jake Cole had changed everything. And the galaxy would never be the same again. The news of the Battle of the Outer Reaches spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Within days, every inhabited world had seen the recordings. They watched as a single human, armed with nothing but improvised weapons and sheer determination, defeated an entire Vex attack squadron. They watched as ancient legends came to life before their eyes. They watched as the galaxy was reminded of something it had forgotten long ago. Humans were not myths. They were not exaggerated stories told to frighten children. They were real, and they were exactly as dangerous as the old records had claimed. The Vex Dominion withdrew behind their borders and went silent. For the first time in living memory, they made no raids on Confederacy shipping. They launched no probes against the border defenses. They simply waited and watched, trying to understand what had happened and what it meant for their plans of conquest. The Confederacy High Council summoned Jake Cole to the capital world of Nexus Prime. He arrived aboard the captured Vex destroyer, which he had renamed the Second Chance. Captain Zell piloted the ship, while Scholar Bren documented everything for his historical records. They were joined by Tess and a handful of other Velari, who had fought alongside Jake in the battle. They had earned the right to stand with him, and he refused to leave them behind. The capital was unlike anything Jake had ever seen. Nexus Prime was a world that had been entirely converted into a single massive city. Towers of crystal and metal stretched toward the sky, connected by bridges that seemed to float on nothing. Ships of every design imaginable filled the airways, carrying beings from 100 different species about their daily business. It was beautiful. It was magnificent. It was everything that humanity had dreamed of building, and more. And it was completely unprepared for war. Jake saw the truth as soon as he arrived. The Confederacy had grown soft over the millennia of peace. Their military was a ceremonial force, designed more for parades than combat. Their weapons were outdated, their tactics were ancient. If the Vex ever decided to launch a full invasion, the Confederacy would fall within a decade. The council chamber was a vast amphitheater filled with representatives from every member species. They sat in rising tiers around a central platform, their eyes fixed on the human who stood alone in the center of the room. Jake looked up at them without fear. He had faced worse than politicians in his life. The senior counselor, an ancient Keth named Elder Ven, spoke first. Jake Cole of Earth, you have been summoned before this council to explain your actions in the outer reaches, and to help us determine how the Confederacy should respond to your presence. I am happy to answer any questions you have, Jake said, but I think you already know why I am here. The Vex attacked a civilian vessel in Confederacy space. I defended that vessel. The real question is why your own forces were not there to protect it. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The outer reaches are far from our patrol routes, a Sundari representative said defensively. We cannot be everywhere at once. The Vex knew that. Jake replied. They counted on it. They sent an entire attack squadron into your territory, and no one noticed until it was almost too late. He paused. How long do you think it will be before they try again? How many ships will they send next time? The chamber fell silent. Jake continued. I have studied your records. I have learned about your history. 8,000 years ago, my species helped build this confederacy. We fought beside you in the wars that forged this union. We taught you how to defend yourselves against the darkness between the stars. His voice grew harder. And then we died. And you forgot everything we taught you. We are not warriors, Elder Ven said. We are scholars and traders and artists. Violence is not in our nature. Violence is not in anyone's nature until it becomes necessary for survival, Jake said. You have had the luxury of peace because the galaxy believed that humans might still be out there, ready to fight if needed. That fear kept the Vex at bay. It kept the other predator species from testing your borders. He shook his head. But now they know the truth. Humanity is gone, and you are alone. A young Valari delegate stood up. Her name was Lyra, and she was one of the youngest members of the council. What would you have us do? She asked. We cannot change what we are. We cannot become warriors overnight. Jake looked at her. He saw the fear in her eyes, but he also saw something else. He saw the same spark that he had seen in his own soldiers back on Earth. The spark of courage waiting to be kindled. You cannot become warriors overnight, he agreed. But you can learn. You can train. You can prepare for the day when the Vex return. Because they will return. It is not a question of if, but when. He stepped forward. I am offering to help you. I will teach you what I know. I will share the tactics and strategies that made humanity feared across the galaxy. I will help you build a military that can actually defend this confederacy. And what do you want in return? A suspicious Sundari delegate demanded. Jake was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. I want to honor the memory of my people. Humanity is gone. I cannot bring them back, but I can make sure that what we built does not disappear with us. He looked around the chamber at the assembled representatives of 100 worlds. You are my family now, all of you, the only family I have left. I want to protect you the way I could not protect my own species. The chamber was silent. Then Lyra stood up again. I believe him, she said. I have watched the recordings of the battle. I have seen what one human can do against overwhelming odds. If he is willing to teach us, we should listen. Other delegates began to nod. One by one, they rose to express their support. The Valari, the Keth, even some of the Sundari. Though they did so grudgingly, the tide of opinion shifted until only a handful of voices remained in opposition. Elder Ven called for a formal vote. The result was decisive. Jake Cole was granted citizenship in the Galactic Confederacy. He was given the rank of Fleet Marshal and placed in command of a new military initiative designed to prepare the Confederacy for the conflicts ahead. He was given resources and authority, and the trust of a galaxy that had once feared his kind. The years that followed were difficult, but rewarding. Jake established training academies on a dozen worlds. He designed new ships and weapons based on human military principles. He took the soft, peaceful species of the Confederacy and taught them how to be soldiers without losing what made them who they were. Lyra became one of his best students. She had a natural talent for tactics that surprised even Jake. She was the first non-human to graduate from the Advanced Command Program, and she went on to become one of the finest officers in the new Confederacy fleet. Captain Zell continued to serve as Jake's closest advisor and friend. She understood him in ways that few others could, having been there from the very beginning. When Jake doubted himself, she reminded him of what he had already accomplished. When he pushed himself too hard, she made him rest. Scholar Bren dedicated himself to preserving human history and culture. He established the Cole Foundation, an organization devoted to searching for any other human survivors who might be hidden in forgotten corners of the galaxy. The search never found another living human, but it uncovered countless artifacts and records that helped the galaxy understand who humanity had truly been. The Vex tested the Confederacy borders 3 more times over the following decades. Each time, they were met with resistance that shocked them. The soft species they had once dismissed as prey had learned to fight back. They had learned to be brave. Jake led the defense in person during the 3rd incursion. He was 70 years old by then, his body worn down by age and old injuries, but he still fought with the same determination that had carried him through the Battle of the Outer Reaches. The Vex were driven back with losses so severe that they finally sued for peace. The treaty that followed was the first formal agreement between the Dominion and the Confederacy in galactic history. Jake lived for another 42 years after that. He never stopped teaching. He never stopped preparing. He spent his final years writing down everything he remembered about human history and philosophy, creating a record that future generations could study and learn from. He died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 112. surrounded by the friends who had become his family. The funeral was the largest in Confederacy history. Representatives from every member species attended, filling the great plaza of Nexus Prime with a sea of diverse faces united in grief. Lyra, now an admiral herself, gave the eulogy. She spoke of courage and sacrifice, and the power of a single individual to change the course of history. They built a monument on the ice moon where Jake had been found. It was a simple stone marker, standing alone on the frozen surface where the wandering star had first detected his cryo chamber so many years ago. The inscription was written in both human English and the common galactic script. Here lay Jake Cole, the last human, the first of a new age. He taught us to be brave again. Visitors came from across the galaxy to see the monument. They stood in the cold and read the words and tried to imagine what it must have been like to wake up alone in a universe where everyone you had ever loved was gone. Some of them left flowers. Some of them left small tokens from their home worlds. Some of them simply stood in silence and paid their respects. The Confederacy continued to grow and prosper in the centuries that followed. New species were discovered and welcomed into the Union. New worlds were colonized. New challenges arose and were overcome. And through it all, the memory of Jake Cole endured. They told stories about him to their children. They studied his tactics in their military academies. They remembered the human who had refused to surrender even when all hope seemed lost. Some of them even believed that somewhere, in some forgotten corner of the galaxy, other humans might still be sleeping in their cryo chambers, waiting to be found. The search continued, generation after generation, driven by the hope that humanity's story was not truly over. But whether or not another human was ever discovered, Jake Cole had accomplished something remarkable. He had ensured that his species would never be forgotten. He had taken the dying ember of human civilization and used it to light a fire that would burn across the galaxy for millennia to come. The stars still remember what humans were like, and they always will.